This call is now being recorded.
A very good afternoon, everybody. And in this online class, we are going to talk about viral modernism. And we want to read this poem, a very famous modernist poem known as the epic of the modern times, the modern epic, the Westland. And we want to see whether T.S. Eliot, when he was writing this poem, also there was the time of Spanish flu, influenza was widespread as it is in our time in terms of corona pandemic. And we know that our minds are not free from corona pandemic. Everybody has suffered in one or the other ways. Either we have been ill or our family members or our neighbors, but you can't find anybody who has not been affected by corona pandemic. In one or the other ways, people might have seen that some relatives also might have died during this pandemic. So pandemic do capture our imagination. Our lifestyles have completely changed. We are doing this online classes. That also is an example that instead of normal routine face-to-face classrooms, for quite a long time, we are just meeting online. So that also is the outcome of corona pandemic. So the question that comes is that what happened during Spanish flu? Because it was interwar period, it was just after First World War, and then there was again Second World War that was coming. How our cultural memory recorded it. And quite surprisingly, we have found that we have not recorded that Spanish flu in a significant way. So far as our literary imagination is concerned, so far as our writing of literary history is concerned, our literary historians also have not taken or not given much space to Spanish flu and what happened to the human beings because of that. And that is a very surprising thing, that why we have done this. A very recent book which has come up, which tries to look into this. This is Viral Modernism by Elizabeth Autka, published by Columbia University Press. And Elizabeth Autka is trying to look into the reasons, that what may be the possible reasons, and then is it possible to read some of the famous works of 1920s, around 20s, during the pandemic time, the works which are written, can we find anywhere hidden, coded pandemic in the language of that poetry or not? So that is the prime concern to see this. And in this class, we are going to look at the Westland. In the previous class, a few days back, I think in the last month, we discussed this one poem by W.B. Yeats's poem. In that poem, we have also seen that how it deals with the idea of pandemic. That was from Apocalyptic Pandemic, W.B. Yeats's The Second Coming. And in Second Coming also, we have seen earlier that how the pandemic has been recorded. The wife was suffering from, Yeats's wife was suffering from pandemic, influenza, flu of those days, and that things are recorded. That was what we have seen. Today we want to see about T.S. Eliot's The Westland. But we also want to see that what actually is Elizabeth Autka trying to look into this, when she is trying to study that what else, apart from the textual reading of the poem and finding or interpreting the meaning in one or the other ways that we will see as an examples, but what actually she is trying to look, that also we want to see. Before we enter into those passages which are becoming a part of one of the interviews given by her, where she is explaining, and also written in the introduction of this book also, before we go there, some of the questions that we can see here, the kind of questions we can find here. Let me share a screen. So reading the Westland through pandemic lens, we want to see this. And the questions that we may get here. or something like this. These questions are the possible way of looking at this research article. Is it possible to read Westland through the pandemic lens? Then the sense of innervation, innervation, fragmentation, vulnerable bodies are iconic elements of the Westland. So how can we illustrate this from the reading of the poem or not? That we have to see. I would suggest you to find the meaning of innervation. Yes, innervation and delirium. Two words we will keep on repeating again and again. So just keep the meaning handy and ready. Innervation and delirium. Then Elizabeth Autka argues that critics have missed the poem's viral context. So was there any viral context? Can we find that in this poem or not? That will be our quest in our discussion. And then again, it is said that the miasmic residue of the pandemic experience infuses every part of the poem. Now that perhaps can be a kind of a rhetorical statement, that is poem full with the residue, miasmic residue of pandemic, or it is somewhere only. So that will be a bit difficult, but still at many places we'll be able to find the residue of pandemic experience in the poem. And Eliot builds a pathogenic atmosphere of wind, fog, and air, the images capturing contagion and the power of the threat alongside its ineffability and diffuseness. So how can we see this reference to wind, fog, air, or even bells and other things get connected with the contagion and the threat that goes with this? So, and then silence, forgetting, and the afterlife. That we will see after a break. After a small break, we will come down to last two short notes to discuss that. So we want to find the answers of these questions there. Well, let us start with these observations, which becomes a part of the interview by Rebecca Onion. And the interview's prime concern is this question: why does its cultural memory feel so faint? It's, that is, 1918 flu pandemic, which killed so many people. But why the memory of this pandemic is very faint, their cultural memory? So a very interesting observation comes here in the first paragraph. Diseases are recorded differently by our minds than something like a war. Now, there is a constant comparison with war, because the Westland has been seen and recorded by critics as a response to war, that is First World War. And as we discussed earlier also in our classes of classes on the setting of the modernist literature, where First World War and Second World War played a very vital role in giving rise to or spread of existential angst, the idea of nothingness, the idea of meaninglessness, fragmented life, brokenness, shattered mirror image, that all very much it is connected with war. And everybody is reading that because of war, the sensitive minds, the imaginative minds were very much disturbed. And so their work of art was always or is always read in response to that. They are writing to record the war experience, Now, so this point comes that First World War is there, 1914 to 18. So many people died in that, and the war memory is very much alive with us. The cultural memory of war is very much with us. But cultural memory of the disease, which went from 18 to around 21, 22, different waves of this pandemic flu, which continued. But that is not recorded by our minds. That is our cultural mind or our collective consciousness. So he says the diseases are recorded differently by our minds than something like a war. By their nature, diseases are highly individual. Even in a pandemic situation, you are fighting your own internal battle with the virus, and it's individual to you. Many people in a pandemic situation may be fighting the same battle, but it's strangely both individualized and widespread. Now, this is very interesting point. Now, we know it is very widespread, but still every individual is fighting one's own battle. Everybody is struggling for the life. Now war is something else. There are few people who are fighting for everybody. In war, few soldiers on the border are fighting for the other. Everybody is not fighting. Here perhaps everybody is fighting, yet it is an individual battle. In war, a few are fighting, but it is everybody's battle. So the way the narratives that we have of war and of disease, there are more possibilities of war being recorded in a proper way in our memory than the disease, which becomes very personal battle. A pandemic's enormous impact is just not necessarily one that's recorded in the ways we expect history to be recorded. You can record the economic loss, you can count the bodies, which we can do with pandemic. Economic loss, we can count the bodies, though we keep on fighting whether which number is right. Though that can be difficult too. Yes? You can study the science of the virus, but there is a difficulty with making the loss visible, which you can say that, well, this much. And there is lots of conflict around this. In battlefield, you can easily give this number of soldiers died, and this is the casualty. But in this, it is very difficult. You might be aware that yesterday in Parliament, in the monsoon session that is ongoing in Parliament, to the question that how many people died due to lack of oxygen, the official government answer is that 0 people died. 0 people died due to lack of oxygen, which was a very shocking answer. Now, that means that we do not have a system to record the deaths in pandemic. That how are you recording? How many people actually died because of coronavirus? And what is the official figure? What is the official figure which wherein on the death certificate it is mentioned? And well, people say varied number. There is lots of debate around that. Some people say it is 10 times lesser than the actual figure, but then you will never be able to find the final figure. That is the problem with the pandemic. So even while the pandemic is happening, still it is very difficult to record in our memory in a proper way. War is a different dynamics. Of course, that's one of the reasons we have memorials to people who died in wars, to take something not quite tangible and turn it into something people can see. I think with the disease, that can be difficult to do. Diseases often impact bodies in ways that are difficult to define. Viruses are invisible. Contagion can often be tracked generally, but not specifically. I think these are all things that feed into this. This is Elizabeth Outka who is replying to the question in an interview, that maybe because of these reasons, these are the interpretation that she is making there. It's difficult to memorialize a pandemic because disease makes people feel helpless, and there's very little we can do to make meaning from it. With war, even if you disagree with the war, you could at least argue about whether the death was worth it. Did this sacrifice keep a soldier's family safe? With an infectious disease, if you die, your family is more likely to die. There is no sacrificial structure to build around a loss of this kind. It's simply tragedy. And it is not only tragedy, we can add more. You also get a disgrace. People say that, well, you are careless. You are careless. You were roaming unnecessarily. What was need to go in Kumbh Mela? What was need to go in the election rally? Why are you making this large crowd gathering? Why are you going to temples? Why are you going on a beach for a picnic, family outing? Why? So you do not, when you die in a disease, people do not consider that as a sacrifice, except for that you are a doctor, except you are a doctor and you are doing that. So otherwise it is a disgrace. It is, and people will try to hide. People will try to hide that this happened. So very few people will very officially put the thing. Like if somebody from my family has died fighting with the terrorists in Kashmir, I'll be very proud of it. I will put it on Facebook, on newspaper cuttings, and then Veer Shahid so and so, and people will appreciate that. But if people dies in pandemic, then people are a little bit in a shock. It is not considered something really great. And it is not only the disease that is the pandemic, all kinds of disease also become a part of that. So that makes a very interesting point, that why the cultural memory of disease pandemic is very faint as compared to war, and why we have lots of war in literature. The imagination, the response, imaginative response to war is much larger, more visible than the pandemic. Literature is especially good at capturing these elements of disease that are difficult to represent. Our body's perceptions of the world depends on the health of the body and the experiences of that body. There is that sort of invisible, strange conversation that happens between the body and the mind. Literature can capture that. Literature can also capture the way a loss of a loved one's lives lives on in all those very small gestures. So it can be said that if the larger memory of society may fail to perceive the loss of disease, pandemic, literature will not miss it. Literature obviously will capture all those elements of disease. And whatever body experiences, literature has to write about it. Literature cannot escape from writing those things. So the point that comes here, that if literature is writing, the problem is that we are not reading those things. We are not habituated of reading. So there is a problem with reading rather than writing. Literature will capture everything. Photographers will capture, cinema makers will capture, poem writers will capture, drama also will capture. They all will capture. But the problem will be with the readers. Readers will not be able to decode that language. And so it becomes very interesting to see whether we can read the Westland with this insight. Can we see that language wherein we can find all these things also or not? So the Westland of influenza, yes, the Westland of influenza. In the years surrounding the right. So how do you do this work? How do you narrow down to this, and in what way can you do these kinds of reading? See, one very important thing you require when we do this kind of reading is biographical information. That is author's biography, what happened to author during those time. That is very, very important. Now, after 100 years, when you are trying to read what happened in 1918, in 2020, if you try to read that, or in 21, then what can help you is only letters. If the writers have written letters to anybody, if you go back and try to minutely read letters, and if you find anywhere, because letters will always have that news that how is your health? You know, today when we do now, letter writing is also a dead habit. Rarely people write letters nowadays. So it will be very difficult to see now in coming times, how are people going to record all this thing, what is happening. People are, if they're not writing letters, they are on social media, they are doing something, but well, if they delete everything on social media, what evidence will be there with posterity to think of something? That will be a very complex question. And then maybe 100 years down the line, people can say that, well, this digital time was somewhere very harmful to document the lives of the people in proper way. See, today it seems the digital way is helping us in documenting everything. But if because in digital life, it is very easy to erase also. It is very easy to delete everything also. And so on a single click, you can wipe off everything, which is not possible with diaries and letters which are already sent to somebody. And somebody might have preserved those letters. This perhaps very rarely happens in the digital time. So the paradox here, digital life, which helps us to document each and every moment of our life, perhaps it itself will be harmful after 100 years to see that the life of this time is nowhere found. It was in digital space and it is gone now from the memory of the people. So letters becomes very important. So if you find in letters something about pandemic, then you can connect with the poet. So that biographical information is very useful. Now, if you cannot find that, then it is very difficult to read the language of poetry without that biographical information. So remember this, you are reading a poem, you are trying to read that this word means this here, the poet is not only talking about war or spirituality, the earth of spirituality, but the poet is also speaking about pandemic. But you can do that reading only if you have some biographical information. So here initially we look at this letter from Eliot to Graham Wallace, and there are a collection of letters by T.S. Eliot which are published, and from which volume it is taken, that also is cited at the bottom here. In the years surrounding the writing and publication of the Westland, influenza was a constant presence for T.S. Eliot and his wife Vivian. So during these years, influenza was very much present. So T.S. Eliot was suffering from it. The wife also was suffering from it, and many family members also died. Almost everybody in and around the family and the surrounding were infected by influenza. So it was very much in the memory of T.S. Eliot, who is trying to write the poem to record the time, like the Westland. It is there. The couple, that is husband and wife, caught the virus in December 1918 in the second wave of the pandemic. Given the strain of Eliot and his marriage at the time, we know that we have studied the biographical aspect that he was not having a good relation with wife because of his own sexual impotency and the wife's extrovert way of dealing with the exploits, with the relation with other people also. So given the strain of on Eliot and his marriage at the time, the causes for this disruption extended beyond the flu. The another letter from the same period suggests the term influenza encompassed the larger atmosphere. So influenza was very much present in the life of, in the mind of, not only in the body of T.S. Eliot, but also in the mind of T.S. Eliot. And he said that this influenza was not only the virus, but it was also the domestic life. It was also the wife. So it was not the virus only, but it was also the wife. So that is why it was the larger atmosphere. It encompassed the larger atmosphere. Eliot writes of the long epidemic of domestic influenza. They have just withered in 1918, the language registering the actual illness and the illness of his domestic arrangement. So his problem with the wife also becomes a kind of an influenza. So bodily is suffering, but apart from bodily, there is also the mind that is captured. So influenza in domestic life also was there. The atmosphere of influenza and illness described in Eliot's letters was a microcosm of the broader pandemic climate. There has been a great deal of pneumonic influenza about, and if one of us got it, he would have to go to a hospital. Letter to his brother Henry. So in many letters, there is lots of reference to the pandemic. Pneumonic influenza is mentioned. Then another letter to Henry, his brother. I have simply had a sort of collapse. I slept almost continuously for 2 days. I feel very weak and exhausted. And then again, in the another letter which was published in the Dial in 1921, it is London letter. There is a typo error there. A new form of influenza which leaves extreme dryness and a bitter taste in the mouth. Now, you can see this nowadays also in our corona. We were becoming tasteless. People say you can't smell anything, you can't taste anything, and then and then it was like you start getting frightened that am I suffering from corona? I'm not able to taste. I don't have a sense of smell. So these were those symptoms. Extreme dryness. Now that is where the dryness and fever in the body, it is connected with lot many imageries in the poem. Physical and mental health issues culminated in Eliot's nervous breakdown. So all these things, his family life, the influenza, the body was collapsing, the mind was not able to bear, and he suffered from nervous breakdown in 1921. So all these things becomes a part of the making of the poem. So the sense of innervation. Yes, what is the meaning of innervation? Who is going to tell me?
Sir, innervation means weakness or weak.
Okay, weakness, weak. Still any other words? Anybody else? Yes, anybody else?
innervation means a feeling of being drained of energy or vitality.
Yes, being drained of energy. Yeah, okay, yes. Then anybody still?
Moral
Anybody?
and mental weakness.
Yes, moral and mental. Yeah, that is also there is weakness. Yeah, there is physical weakness, but this is like somebody's physical, mental, as well as moral vitality is drained. Moral vitality also, because this poem deals with that spirituality, vacuity of moral sense of order or ethical sense of order. That also is at the point. So innervation. Innervation means weakness, but it is obviously physical weakness also, but it goes beyond that. Physical, mental, and when important word, it is moral weakness. Moral vitality is also very down and out. Yeah. And delirium means delirium. Delirium. Delirium, the word which will.
A
Yes.
temporary mental state with a sudden onset, confusion, or inability to concentrate.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, okay. One more word, if I can get. Yes. Anybody else? Delirium.
A disturbed state of mind.
A disturbed state of mind. Yes. Extreme restlessness, confusion, sometimes hallucinations also. Very wild dreams that people get, hallucinations, like we have seen in Lady Macbeth's case also. And these all things are fever, caused by fever or some kind of poisoning or brain injury, poisoning, fever. So now if you have ever experienced heavy fever in your body, now at that time your mental state is very much disturbed. You might have hallucinations, very frightening dreams. People sometimes, normally children, they get very much frightened in their feverish night, very much frightened. They suddenly wake up, they start crying. When we grow up, we can't cry, but still we can feel the frightening effect of the fever when it affects our mind. At that time, there is, so for that condition, we use the word delirium. So it is a state marked by extreme restlessness, confusion, and sometimes hallucinations, caused by what? Caused by fever, or some kind of poisoning or brain injury. So here we can say pandemic. And then the illness of pandemic is very frightening. You might have experienced yourself, or family members might have experienced that as soon as you get some kind of symptoms of corona, you start getting some kind of fear in yourself. People start getting fear, and then you have a mild fever, just an allergic cough and cold. Then also people suddenly starts getting a panic there. So delirium becomes very interesting. So sense of innervation and delirium, that we'll see. So a sense of innervation, fragmentation, and vulnerable bodies are iconic elements of the Westland, though they have not been seen through a pandemic lens. But through what we have seen, innervation, fragmentation, and vulnerable bodies, through the lens of war or dearth of spirituality, sexual perversion, or personal life. We have seen in that way, but not in this way. So perhaps the quintessential modernist poem of the 20th century, the work with all its corpses, bones, and malaise, has been subject to wide-ranging critical attention. And we have discussed all these observations about Westland. A poem arising from the ashes of the First World War, a response to Europe's disintegration, cultural disintegration of Europe, an expression of Eliot's own personal struggles with his marriage and his sexuality, a controversial reading of an ode to Eliot's suppressed desire for his friend Jean Verdenel, Eliot's debt to anthropological work of James G. Fraser and Jesse Weston, and to the myths of the Fisher King are explored. Yeah. Eliot's use of Buddhism, Upanishad, eco-critical perspectives are also investigated. Popular culture and many literary references are also identified. Yeah. So through variety of lenses, this poem has been studied, yeah, by scholars, by critics, there. But one reading that was not there, which was very much near to this poem, that was that pandemic, Spanish flu, that was not done. Despite this wealth of readings, critics have missed the poem's viral context that was nowhere found up till now. One may question, if pandemic was so engulfing the mind and body, why has Eliot not referred to it directly in the poem? This question can come in mind, that why he is not directly referring to. Well, the answer to this question is another question. The answer to this question is another question that, well, in that case, it is worth considering how scholars have approached the role of the war in the poem. The poem is connected very much with war, First World War. But still, writer is not at all referring to war also directly anywhere. He is not mentioning any direct reference to war. That was just the reading that was done by the people. Scholars often link all the death, bodies, rats, and so on to the war and the European unrest. However, Eliot pushed against this reading, declaring that the poem was only the relief of a personal and wholly insignificant grudge against life. So Eliot said that, well, this poem is not even about war or any other thing. It is my very personal poem. It is a relief of a personal and wholly insignificant grudge of life. That is what he wanted to say. But when people said, no, it is not only that, it is something more. So there is no direct reference to any other thing still we are reading. Then there is no direct reference to pandemic also. And yet we can do the similar reading here. As Samuel Hines observed, the lack of direct war references doesn't negate the poem's links to the war. It isn't that the poem describes the war. Eliot simply picked up the fragments that existed in post-war consciousness and made a poem out of them. A poem that his contemporaries found haunting, even when they didn't understand it. This is very important. Contemporaries found haunting, even when they didn't understand it, because they shared its fragments. Elizabeth Autka argues that part of the poem's power is that Eliot did the same thing for post-pandemic consciousness. The way with the post-war consciousness, similarly here. Channeling a set of experiences and fragments that were haunting the culture but were difficult to represent. He may or may not have been channeling the pandemic experience intentionally, as he may or may not have been channeling the war intentionally. But he grants a voice to widespread experiences that by their nature were inchoate and elusive. So that is the logic given here to read pandemic in this poem. And then this entire article, the discussion of this article breaks into this part. So the wasteland of influenza, and then we find two parts in which this article or this poem can be studied. One is outbreak and another is aftermath. So while the outbreak, when the pandemic is going on, outbreak, and then after effect of the aftermath. In that two way we see, and then it gets divided. The first part, outbreak, discusses 3 parts, and aftermath discusses the other 3 parts. So looking at this infographic will help you to see that how you read this article. It's a bit long article, very long article, and maybe very difficult to comprehend everything. Maybe this infographic may help you to comprehend what you have to see and what you have to do. Even it can help you in your exams also to draw the infographic and to write about it also. So outbreak will fall into sensory experience of acute infection, then reality bending, delirium, the fever, then along with fever, dehydration, threat of drowning and wind, that will be the part there. And in aftermath, death, viral resurrection, silence, forgetting, and their afterlife. This way, the entire article is divided in the discussion. We will discuss the outbreak part here in this discussion, and then we will quickly overview the aftermath in the second part of our session. So this time, first part, that is outbreak. Let us see how we can give textual evidence now. Textual evidence, how we can pick up lines from the original poem to prove our point that there is a pandemic deeply connected or rooted in this poem, apart from war and many other things also. So delirium logic, a fever dream. On the broadest level, the poem's well-known fragmentation, its multiple voices and its constant leaps from topic to topic suggest what we might term a delirium logic, a comprehensive vision of reality from within a fever dream. Well, let us try to understand this observation. So these words like multiple voice and constant leaps, jumping from one topic to another topic. So as you have studied the entire poem, you know that paragraph after paragraph, it is collage of so many images, collage of so many images, and not a single image in that way gets connected with another image. It seems like you are jumping from one image to another image. Suddenly you are in 20th century England, and you are talking about Madame Sosostris, and suddenly you go back into the myth and you start talking about Isolde and Tristan, or from there you go to Hyacinth and Apollo, God Apollo, Hyacinth. There you start jumping. So you never know how you keep on taking leaps from topic to topic, multiple voices. Now this very pattern, this pattern of doing the thing is very similar to what we call it as fever dream. So if we are deep into fever, then our mind is almost having these kinds of images, hallucinating images. They keep on coming and going in this multiple voices. So that is what the first logic tries to say. That is delirium logic. Of the poem seems to be, entire poem seems to be a kind of a fever dream, a kind of a fever dream. Now imagine we have seen that the poem is like a rosary beads, that image we were seeing earlier. Now we see that this image is a kind of a fever dream. It is a delirium logic under which we are trying to read this entire poem. So at that point also we can easily prove. So suppose this statement is given in your exam and it is told that will justify it. So what you have to write is that collage of images, that answer that you have prepared, that only you have to write here to prove your point. Okay? Then the miasmic residue of the pandemic experience infuses every part of the poem. And so when we see the very beginning of the poem, when we try to see residue of the pandemic in each and every part of the poem, the beginning, April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us. So this beginning. Now Levinson, one critic, Levinson has said, has observed that this very beginning of the poem, Michael Levinson, the voice of this poem, he says that the opening of the Westland is told from a corpse's point of view, a dead body who is buried, and as if we are the dead body and we are looking from there. So it seems to be that this point of view or this perspective, or where is camera, if you want to use that language of the cinema, then camera is buried, and as if from that within the burial ground, the camera is looking at something and trying to narrate that experience. So it seems like it is corpse, that is dead body, buried dead body's point of view, granting a beneath the ground perspective, beneath the ground, buried body, ground perspective from inside a dead body. So the very first image comes is about a dead body, and we know that in pandemic time we have seen lot many dead bodies burning on a pyre or even ready for the burial ceremony. Lot many we have seen nowadays. Otherwise it would be very difficult to connect this dead bodies, the burial idea, but in this time we can easily connect that. The newspapers, television, they were full with the images, the visuals of this. And we are going to see some of the visuals in our second part of our discussion also. Buried within the poem is a parallel perspective, what reality looks like from within bodies suffering from acute illness. So that is the point of view that we can see in the beginning part. Then feverish hallucination, the disintegrating language, because when we have a fever, we all have experienced that our language keeps on disintegrating. It keeps on falling apart. We can't speak. And we know that we have a kind of a dryness in the mouth. Dryness in the mouth. We try to speak, but the tongue doesn't support. And the words are disintegrating. Words are falling. That experience there. So disintegrating language at the end of the fire sermon suggests the viewpoint of someone trapped in a feverish hallucination. So the lines like burning, 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 oh Lord, thou pluckest me out, oh Lord, thou pluckest, burning thing. Well, obviously burning is we have seen a Buddhist connection also. The fire sermon also we have seen. Everything is on a flame, everything is on passion. That reference is what we have seen earlier. But then it can also be the experience of the body, which is burning out of fever. A kind of the temperature that the body and the mind tries to suffer during the illness. Seen through the lens of pandemic, these lines embody the experience that would have been painfully familiar to contemporary readers. And it is familiar to us also, because we also might have experienced, many of you, or we have experienced either family members, or we also might have seen some of the symptoms of those things in our body, also in last 1.5 years of this corona. I don't think anybody would be left without the experience of this. Each and everybody in one or the another way, because even if you have a mild cough and cold, then also you will have this hallucination that will it be corona or not. So that everybody might have undergone that. Poem's fragmentary language. The poem's fragmentation, the broken language, speaks to an experience Eliot actually had, suggesting the virus's impact on consciousness and the physical and spiritual cost of the pandemic. Physical as well as spiritual cost of the pandemic. These lines from a game of chess, staring forms leaned out, leaning, hushing the room enclosed, footsteps shuffled on the stair, under the firelight, under the brush, her hair spread out in fiery points, glowed into words, then would be savagely still. In a game of chess, we get a glimpse of a sick room scene. This seems to be like the room of somebody who is isolated. Somebody who is isolated in a particular room. Now we know what is isolating in that term, that you have to keep somebody aloof for 7 days or 14 days. And that person will have to keep on walking all alone. After 3-4 days, you are okay in your isolation room. But still you have to maintain the social distance with everybody. Your utensils, your thali will be separate. Your clothes will be separate. Your utensils, everything that you use will be very much different from the other thing. It's like a sick room. And again, we can say that almost all the homes during this time might have seen somewhere the corner that was isolated corner, a room that was isolated, a room. Bodily sensation turns into language, a sort of logical extension, the fever rising and the language disintegrating further into that. So that the disintegrating language, the fragmentary language of the poem can be considered as the effect of the pandemic virus on the consciousness of writer also. That is, T.S. Eliot was suffering from the impact of virus. Buried sensory details of the flu's delirium. So this line, a woman drew her long black hair out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings. The bats with baby faces in the violet light whistled and beat their wings and crawled head downward down a blackened wall. And upside down in air were towers, tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. In this decayed hall among the mountains, in the faint moonlight, the grass is singing. Now here we see a hallucinatory effect intensifies in a corresponding moment concerning hair in these lines. Hair turns into fiddle strings, which turn into sound. The eerie forms from the previous passage have morphed into bats and baby faces crawling down walls. The sufferer's world has turned upside down. The sufferer's world has turned upside down, and the ambient sounds have flown more ominous and distorted. The burning thirst along with high fever. So that is that idea of thirst that comes there. And there are many lines where there is that water, desire for water, which is the thirst when anybody is suffering from illness. They want constant supply of water. Again, you might have remembered that during this corona pandemic also, people were suggested that keep on drinking water. See that the water level of your body is not decreasing. Either you are having the fever or not, but maintain the body with water level, sufficient water level. So the language portrays this language. If there were water, we should stop and drink. Amongst the rock, one cannot stop to think. Sweat is dry, feet are in the sand, and there were only water amongst the rock. Dead mountain, mouths carious teeth that cannot speak. If there were water and no rock, if there were rock and also water and water, not a cicada, and the dry grass singing, but sound of water over a rock. Drip, drop, 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 but there is no water. The language in this part portrays a wandering in a desert as well as more metaphoric spiritual crisis. And that is fine. We have seen that spiritual crisis, wandering in desert, that all we have seen up till now. But it also embodies a pandemic perspective, manifesting confused thinking, bodily distortions, helplessness, and overwhelming thirst. The language is feverish. The speaker jumping between broken thoughts and circling back to a sense of thirst. The delirium is in fact underlying the modernist fragmentation. So what is the underlying statement of modernist fragmentation? Earlier it was war, now it is pandemic. The delirium of the pandemic that is underlying each and every word that we see in modern literature, the fragmented modern poem. Such thirst and such brokenness, as critics have noted since the poem's publication, speak to a larger spiritual thirst, the aftermath of war, and a broken Western culture. Yes, fine, yes, that also is true. That all we were doing in our, now we can call it traditional reading of the poem. But the language also links, and that is how we connect now with the corona pandemic. From that perspective, through that lens, we are trying to look that. Language also links to literal thirst and a language broken by fever and reduced to sounds. Eliot's poem serves as a memorial to bodily states, not just spiritual or psychological one, a record of suffering and confusion translated into language in both its form and its content. So the body that has suffered, that is also coming in this language. So it is not only psychological or spiritual aspect that Eliot was suffering from, and he has seen that malaise in the entire European civilization. But apart from that, there was a body that was suffering, and that was also recorded through the same language. Water and wind, we see this imagery also in this. Along with hallucinatory thirst, Eliot depicts an opposite state that paradoxically accompanied that the dryness and dehydration of the pandemic. That is the threat of threat. It is threat of drowning. Threat of drowning. Fear death by water, or the drowned Phoenician sailor. Death by water can be a part of that. Eliot builds a pathogenic atmosphere of wind, fog, and air. The image is capturing contagion and the power of the threat alongside its ineffability and diffuseness. Under the brown fog, the wind under the door. What is the wind doing? The wind crosses the brown land. Only the wind's home, not wind, it is wind. Only the wind's home. Yeah? So, well, water world and the wind world that we can see here, and we see that if you want to understand wind, water perhaps will be a bit difficult for us to connect during this pandemic time. that what is that effect of the threat of drowning in illness. Unless you visualize so many people, or if you visualize the image, which is again a very tropical image. It is not a widespread pandemic image, but an image of the dead bodies on river Ganga, the dead bodies floating on river Ganga. Then you can feel the hallucinatory effect of the threat, not threat, but threat of drowning that you can feel if you visualize those images there, where so many dead bodies, what to do? It takes time in even burying the bodies. Normally in India, the people who by and large are Hindus, they do not bury the bodies. They do cremation. They burn the body on the fire. But we have seen on the ghats of Ganga, in the sands, so many dead bodies were buried. And then as soon as the water comes, all those bodies starts drowning. The body starts floating. And we have seen the visuals of hundreds of dead bodies floating on the river, which was very surprising, that why these bodies were not burnt, or they were not cremated. Why were they buried? And we can understand the effect of pandemic, the very dreading effect of pandemic. We can feel the hallucination. We can feel that so many people might be dying, that people are not even having enough money to purchase woods so that they can cremate the dead body. And then we can feel this, the threat of drowning. But the wind can be easily connected apart from this wind, because we now wear masks. Without this mask, our life has become this, that we have to compulsorily wear the mask, and it is penalty also. If you don't do that, then you are also doing a legal crime also. So without this, we can't. So everywhere there is, the feeling is everywhere there is virus. Everywhere. The air is full of virus. So then you say under the brown fog, wind under the door. What is the wind doing? The wind crosses the brown land. Only the winds home. And then you have to constantly guard yourself from the wind, from the air, which is full with the acrid virus there. Tolling of bells. In this part, the last image that we see here, in the first part, that is outbreak part, where we are discussing this part. The aftermath we will see in our second part. Tolling of bells. The poem also reverberates with the constant tolling of bells, a sound that offers both another image of an invisible force spreading through the atmosphere and penetrating bodies, as well as more literal echo of the bells that rang continuously for the pandemic dead. For example, we have lots of reference to this Saint Mary will not keep the hours with a dead sound on the final stroke of 9, which is the bell on the church, in the church, on the tower of the church, tolling the reminiscent bells that kept the hours. So lots of this tolling of the bell. And this through Ernest Hemingway's famous novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls. You are aware that this tolling of the bell is a sign of death. Somebody is dead, and so the church bell is ringing to pass on the message to the people that somebody is dying. And then in pandemic time, that reverberation of the bell is constant. Constantly the bells are tolling. Well, this is more of a Christian world. What we can see here in our days, like it was in the second wave, in the prime of second wave, what we have seen is a constant voice of ambulance sirens. Ambulance sirens were a constant voice. You go out somewhere and you see people, lots of ambulance moving here and there with the siren on. That was almost threatening to visualize that. So that can be connected with the reverberation of the sirens of the ambulances, or here the church bells, which keeps on constantly tolling. And poem is full of this sound of bells also. And these sounds of tolling bells are not of the battlefields, but in the very air of the city and its domestic space, because we are constantly comparing with war. So when somebody dies in a battlefield, you do not have tolling of bells here. If somebody dies on a battlefield, you will not see ambulances in your domestic spaces or in your city spaces. There you won't see any ambulance moving around. So if there were these voices of bells within the city, in the domestic and city space, Obviously, these are not the signs of war, though people want to read the poem as a war poem, as a response to war, but you have very interesting another way of looking at it also. So in conclusion of part 1, the pandemic's remnants have always been present here, but like the outbreaks, presence is the typo error, absence presence in cultural memory, they have hidden in full view. So lots of remnants of pandemic is present, but the way though pandemics have happened in our lives so many times, but still it is absent from our cultural memory. So is the case with this poem also. So as we started our discussion, diseases are recorded differently by our minds than something like a war. By their nature, diseases are highly individual. Even in pandemic situation, you are fighting your own internal battle. It is very individual. And so it is not recorded perhaps properly, or we are not able to read it properly in a language where there is a visible symbol of pandemic also there. So these are some of the references from where these things are taken. So this is how we see the part 1 of this reading of the wasteland of influenza, the outbreak and this. So we have justified why we are not able to memorize this, because the way war can be memorized, pandemic is difficult to memorize. It is an individual battle. So there are no memorials. There are war memorials, but there are no memorials of the pandemic. Then secondly, even if it is there, literature will capture it. Literature is always going to capture any pain that body suffers, any pain that human suffers is always recorded by literature. Literature will never go out of the purview or remain absent in capturing. But the problem is with our reading. We fail to read that language in that. If there is another aspect of reading, spirituality or disintegration of culture or war, then we will very readily read the language in that direction rather than reading in the direction of pandemic. So with all this thing, it is possible that we may not read something that is there in the language. And so we have done some reading of the poem. Some lines we have read, and we have found that how, in what way pandemic and its influence is present in the language of the poetry also. Okay? Any questions if you have here? Even while reading the article, if you had any question, or here also right now while going through the discussion, if you have any question or want to ask anything, you can ask here. Before we go for a small break, you can ask a question if there is anything. Or if you want to add anything to this, that also you can do. If you need to add anything or want to ask anything. Okay, is it understood? I hope then you will be able to write your answer also, or you can also work out reading other things also with the similar insight if there is anything like this. In future, if you want to do research also, then also I think you are getting some idea about how to read the literature through the lens of pandemic. Okay, so then let me end this session here.